A short video, only a few seconds long, has ignited a global conversation that refuses to fade. Recorded on a dusty worksite, the footage appears to show an employer striking African workers while shouting orders. Within days, it spread across social media, drawing millions of views and provoking shock, anger, and deep discomfort around the world. For many viewers, it was not just about one man or one workplace. It felt like a window into a much larger and more troubling reality. Why did this video resonate so strongly? Because it touched a nerve that runs through history. Power and human dignity. Images of workers being humiliated or mistreated evoke painful memories of past injustices, while raising urgent questions about labor conditions today. In an era when global investment connects nations more tightly than ever, this footage forced people to ask, what happens behind the scenes of massive construction projects, foreign-owned businesses, and cross-border economic partnerships? Online reactions poured in from every corner of the globe. Some called it an isolated incident. Others saw it as part of a recurring pattern that has been reported for years. Comparisons were drawn to historical systems of exploitation, while debates erupted over racism, accountability, and the silence that often surrounds abuses far from the international spotlight. The discussion quickly moved beyond one video, becoming a broader reflection on how the world values workers' lives, especially when those workers are poor, foreign, or marginalized. In this video, we will look beyond the headlines and viral clips. We will explore the context, the documented cases that came before, and the voices that are too often ignored. This is not about fueling hatred or division, but about understanding a reality that demands attention. If you believe stories like this matter, please support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. Your support helps us continue bringing important, eye-opening stories to light. As the video continued to circulate, its impact grew far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. View counts climbed into the tens of millions, not because the footage was sensational, but because it unsettled people. Viewers did not watch and move on. They paused, replayed, and shared it, trying to make sense of what they were seeing and what it might represent. In comment sections and discussion forums, the conversation quickly expanded beyond the individuals in the clip and into a deeper examination of how the world responds to injustice, and just as importantly, when it chooses not to. For many, the footage felt like a reminder that public outrage is often selective. Some voices asked why certain cases of mistreatment dominate headlines while others barely register outside their immediate region. The debate was not about minimizing suffering anywhere, but about questioning the uneven attention given to different victims depending on geography, politics, or economic interests. In this sense, the video became a mirror, reflecting uncomfortable truths about global priorities and the narratives that shape public empathy. As reactions poured in, comparisons emerged between past and present forms of exploitation. These were not casual or careless comparisons, but emotional attempts to understand how systems of power can still place workers in vulnerable positions, especially when they lack legal protection or a strong voice. The discussion revealed a shared frustration that economic development and international investment are often praised without equal scrutiny of how human beings on the ground are treated. People began to ask whether progress can truly be called progress when it comes at the cost of dignity. What made the debate even more intense was the sense that similar stories had surfaced before, only to fade from memory once the news cycle moved on. Viewers recalled reports, court cases, and first-hand accounts from different parts of the world that described harsh working conditions, intimidation, and discrimination. Seen in this broader context, the viral clip did not feel isolated. Instead, it appeared as one visible moment in a pattern that many believe has been quietly repeating itself for years. At the same time, others urge caution, warning against turning outrage into blanket judgments. They emphasize that no nation or culture is free from prejudice and that unfair treatment exists in many forms across the globe. This perspective added another layer to the conversation, shifting it away from blame alone and toward responsibility, accountability, and the role of institutions. The question was no longer who is guilty, but why such situations are allowed to happen repeatedly and what mechanisms fail the people most affected. As days passed, the discussion matured. What began as shock evolved into reflection. The footage forced audiences to confront how easily human rights concerns can be overshadowed by economic ambition or political convenience. It highlighted the gap between public values and real-world practices, revealing how workers at the lowest levels of global supply chains often remain invisible until a camera briefly captures their reality. In the end, the power of the video lay not only in what it showed, but in what it revealed about the world watching it. Millions of viewers were not simply reacting to a single incident. They were grappling with a broader discomfort about inequality, silence, and complicity. The debates it sparked continue to echo because they touch on a question that has no simple answer. How much suffering must be seen before it is truly acknowledged, and how many voices must speak before attention turns into meaningful change? As the discussion widened and emotions intensified, attention gradually shifted from the viral footage itself to the broader record that surrounded it. Viewers began searching for context, and in doing so, they uncovered a series of documented cases spread across several African countries. These were not rumors or isolated social media claims, but incidents that had been reported by news organizations, investigated by authorities, and in some cases addressed through legal systems. Together, they formed a troubling backdrop that made the original video feel less like an exception and more like a warning sign. In Tanzania, a case involving a local worker employed on a major rail project drew national attention after she suffered serious injuries during an altercation with a foreign supervisor. The matter escalated quickly, leading to an arrest and widespread public discussion about workplace protections and accountability. The story resonated because it exposed how easily power imbalances can leave local employees vulnerable, especially when large infrastructure projects move faster than the laws meant to protect workers. Further south, Zimbabwe faced its own reckoning when allegations emerged from a mining operation run by foreign interests. Workers described long hours, unsafe conditions, and treatment that stripped them of basic dignity. While investigations followed, the case highlighted a recurring problem. Even when abuses are reported, the path to justice is often slow, uncertain, and emotionally exhausting for those involved. The economic importance of such projects frequently complicates the willingness of authorities to act decisively. Rwanda offered one of the most widely cited examples when a recorded incident led to a criminal trial and a severe prison sentence for a foreign manager. The footage, which circulated briefly online before being removed, showed behavior that the courts later deemed unacceptable under local law. The outcome was seen by many as a rare moment of accountability, demonstrating that legal consequences are possible when evidence is clear and institutions choose to act. Yet it also raised an unsettling question. How many similar incidents never reach a courtroom because they are never recorded or reported? In Kenya, a separate case ended with a court awarding compensation to a worker who had endured severe mistreatment at the hands of an employer. The ruling was significant not only for the financial judgment, but for its symbolic value. It sent a message that dignity in the workplace is not optional and that economic partnerships do not excuse harmful conduct. Still, for every case that reaches a verdict, countless others remain buried under fear, silence, or lack of access to legal recourse. When these stories are viewed together, a pattern begins to emerge. Not a pattern of nationality, but of unchecked authority operating in environments where oversight is weak and workers have limited power to defend themselves. This is what made the original viral video so unsettling for many viewers. It did not appear out of nowhere. It seemed to fit into a series of events that had been unfolding quietly across borders for years. What ties these cases together is not just the harm suffered, but the shared sense of invisibility that surrounded them until attention was forced upon them. Each incident reveals how easily abuse can persist when economic urgency outweighs human concern. They also demonstrate that accountability, while possible, often depends on rare combinations of evidence, public pressure, and institutional courage. In connecting these events, the story becomes larger than any single country or employer. It becomes a reflection on how global projects are managed, how workers are protected, and how justice is pursued in an interconnected world. The viral footage may have sparked the conversation, but these documented cases give it weight, grounding outrage in reality and reminding the audience that behind every headline are real lives shaped by decisions made far beyond the workset. As the narrative continued to unfold, the focus gradually moved beyond worksites and courtrooms and into a deeper, more uncomfortable space, the social environment that allows such behavior to exist in the first place. The viral video did not only raise questions about labor practices abroad, it also opened a broader conversation about how people of African descent are perceived and treated within China itself. For many observers, this shift was unavoidable, because similar accounts had been shared for decades, long before the camera captured that single moment of abuse. Stories from African students, business owners, and professionals living in Chinese cities began resurfacing in online discussions. Some spoke of subtle exclusions that were easy to dismiss in isolation but impossible to ignore in repetition. Others described experiences that were more direct, taking place in offices, shops, and neighborhoods where curiosity turned into discomfort and difference became a reason for unequal treatment. These narratives revealed that discrimination was not always hidden or coded, but often expressed openly, as though it were a normal part of daily interaction rather than a serious social issue. Workplaces became one of the most frequently mentioned settings. Foreign employees recalled moments when their competence was questioned before their work was even evaluated, or when their presence was treated as temporary and conditional regardless of their qualifications. In some cases, African professionals found themselves excluded from opportunities that were readily available to others, not because of performance, but because of assumptions tied to appearance and origin. These experiences echoed the power dynamics seen in overseas projects, reinforcing the sense that the problem extended beyond borders. Public spaces offered another lens into this reality. Accounts circulated of individuals being avoided in elevators, stared at in restaurants, or treated with suspicion in everyday transactions. While none of these moments alone defined a society, together they painted a picture of how social distance can quietly harden into normalized behavior. For those living through it, the emotional weight accumulated over time, creating a sense of constant visibility paired with persistent exclusion. Social interactions further revealed how deeply rooted certain stereotypes had become. Interracial friendships and relationships were often subjected to scrutiny, gossip, or hostility, not because they harmed anyone, but because they challenged unspoken boundaries. Online spaces amplified these attitudes, allowing caricatures and assumptions to circulate widely and shape public perception. What made this especially troubling was not only the content itself, but how rarely it was confronted or corrected in meaningful ways. Historical context added another layer to the discussion. Scholars and commentators pointed out that racial hierarchies did not emerge in isolation, but were shaped by global histories, colonial narratives, and long-standing ideas about power and development. In this framework, anti-black attitudes were not seen as uniquely national traits, but as inherited concepts that had never been fully examined or dismantled. Without that reckoning, prejudice remained unchallenged, passed along as social habit rather than recognized as harm. The absence of a clear and comprehensive framework to address discrimination was frequently cited as part of the problem. When a society does not openly name an issue, it becomes difficult to measure it, confront it, or resolve it. Many observers noted that while economic partnerships and diplomatic narratives emphasized unity and cooperation, everyday experiences told a more complicated story, one marked by contradiction and silence. By linking these social realities to the earlier accounts of workplace abuse and international incidents, the story gained a clearer shape. The viral video was no longer just about a single act of mistreatment, but about an environment where unequal treatment can exist without immediate consequence. It suggested that meaningful change would require more than outrage or isolated legal cases. It would demand a deeper willingness to acknowledge uncomfortable truths, listen to marginalized voices, and address attitudes that have long been treated as invisible. As personal accounts and public reactions continued to surface, the conversation inevitably turned toward institutions and the structures meant to prevent harm. Individual experiences, no matter how powerful, raised an unavoidable question. What safeguards exist when discrimination moves beyond private behavior and becomes a social pattern? It was at this point that reports from international organizations entered the discussion, adding an authoritative and sobering dimension to the story that had begun with a single video. Human Rights Watch and United Nations bodies have, over the years, examined the legal and regulatory environment surrounding discrimination in China. Their findings introduced a crucial piece of context. While many countries explicitly define racial discrimination in law and provide formal mechanisms for redress, China lacks a comprehensive legal framework that clearly identifies and prohibits it. This absence does not automatically explain every incident, but it does shape how such incidents are addressed, or more often, left unresolved. Without precise legal definitions, victims face uncertainty about where to turn, and accountability becomes inconsistent. This gap is particularly significant when viewed alongside the rapid growth of digital platforms. Social media has become a central space where attitudes are formed, reinforced, and normalized. According to these reports, content that relies on demeaning stereotypes about people of African descent has circulated widely online, often framed as humor, entertainment, or commentary. What makes this phenomenon especially concerning is not only its visibility, but its persistence. When such material remains accessible and profitable, it quietly influences public perception, especially among younger audiences. The reports describe how this content is often used to attract attention and generate traffic, transforming prejudice into a commodity. In this environment, harmful ideas can spread faster than thoughtful responses, reaching millions before any meaningful intervention occurs. While platforms maintain community guidelines, enforcement has been described as uneven, creating a space where some forms of expression are quickly removed while others remain largely untouched. This inconsistency reinforces the perception that certain forms of harm are taken less seriously than others. When placed alongside earlier accounts of workplace abuse and everyday discrimination, these findings added coherence to the broader narrative. The viral video no longer appeared as an isolated failure of individual behavior, but as a symptom of deeper structural issues. Without clear legal standards or consistent moderation, social norms are shaped less by principle and more by repetition. Over time, what goes unchallenged begins to feel acceptable, even inevitable. The role of international scrutiny further complicated the picture. China frequently emphasizes themes of cooperation, development, and mutual respect in its global partnerships, particularly across Africa. Yet the contrast between official messaging and the realities described in these reports created a tension that many observers found difficult to ignore. The disconnect suggested that economic relationships alone cannot substitute for ethical responsibility, and that silence on discrimination undermines claims of equality and shared progress. Importantly, the reports did not frame the issue as unique or immutable. Instead, They highlighted the need for acknowledgement as the first step toward change. Recognizing discrimination as a real and measurable problem opens the door to education, legal reform, and cultural reflection. Without that recognition, harmful patterns remain invisible, dismissed as misunderstandings rather than addressed as systemic concerns. As the story evolved, these institutional findings grounded emotional reactions in documented analysis. They transformed outrage into inquiry and shifted attention from individual blame to collective responsibility. The absence of strong legal protections and the unchecked spread of harmful narratives online emerged as central threads linking the video, the testimonies, and the broader social climate. In the end, these reports reinforced a central truth of the unfolding story. Meaningful change does not begin with silence or denial, but with the willingness to confront uncomfortable realities. The viral footage sparked attention, lived experiences gave it depth, and institutional assessments gave it clarity, revealing that addressing discrimination requires not only empathy, but systems capable of turning recognition into action. The arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic became a turning point that brought many of these underlying tensions into full view. What had long existed beneath the surface was suddenly exposed under the pressure of fear, uncertainty, and crisis management. As governments and communities struggled to contain the virus, Africans living in parts of China found themselves facing measures that went beyond public health and crossed into unequal treatment. Reports emerged of evictions from apartments, denial of services, and compulsory quarantines imposed based not on medical evidence, but on appearance and origin. For many observers, this moment crystallized concerns that had been raised for years. Images and testimonies circulated of people forced to sleep outdoors after being turned away from their homes and hotels, while notices appeared barring entry to certain spaces. These incidents resonated deeply because they echoed earlier patterns discussed throughout this story. Invisibility suddenly replaced by hypervisibility, and belonging replaced by suspicion. The pandemic did not create these attitudes, but it magnified them, revealing how quickly fear can justify exclusion when protective systems are weak or absent. International reaction was swift. African diplomats and governments publicly demanded explanations, an uncommon step that reflected the seriousness of the situation. Official statements emphasized equality and rejected discrimination. Yet for many affected individuals, words felt disconnected from lived reality. The contrast between policy language and personal experience underscored the core issue running through this entire narrative. Accountability is measured not by declarations, but by outcomes. For those who lived through this period, the emotional impact lingered long after restrictions eased. Trust was shaken, and the idea of safety became conditional. Some spoke of reconsidering their futures, questioning whether opportunity was worth the constant negotiation of dignity. Their stories added a human conclusion to a journey that began with a single video and expanded into a global reflection on power, race, and responsibility. Taken together, the events surrounding the pandemic did more than provoke outrage. They forced a reckoning. They reminded audiences that discrimination does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it reveals itself in moments of crisis, when empathy is tested and principles are put under strain. The calls that followed were not only for apologies or explanations, but for structural change, clearer protections, and genuine dialogue that moves beyond image management. This story does not end with one incident, one report, or one moment in history. It ends with a question directed at all of us. What kind of global community do we want to build when borders, economies, and lives are so deeply interconnected? Awareness is only the first step. Understanding, accountability, and sustained effort must follow if lessons are to be learned rather than repeated. Thank you for taking the time to watch and reflect on this story. If you found this analysis meaningful and believe these conversations deserve space and attention, Please support the channel by liking the video and subscribing. Your support helps ensure that complex, often uncomfortable stories continue to be told with depth, context, and humanity.